What's going on, Hokies fans? We roll on to week 2 of our 2024 Virginia Tech football coverage. Fall camp is fully underway. We just had media day the other day, and our entire football crew is on set. It's episode 366 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it gets going right now. We record on Wednesday, August 7th, 2024, from our high-tech studios at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend. Also, head over to techsideline.com. Check out our extensive editorial content. As always, the first month of your subscription is free, and student subscriptions are free as well. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. The TSL podcast is also sponsored by the Hokie Way, whose countdown to kickoff campaign is fully underway all this month. This is a huge campaign for the Hokie Way that generated over $500,000 in NIL funds last year. We'll be featuring updates on the campaign all month long, so check out Tech Sideline to find out how you can donate. We'll also drop a link in the YouTube description, so look out for that as well. Once again, as always, I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way, Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer. And in the fourth chair, as always, managing editor David Cunningham. The mustache man, Nick Brown, is producing behind the scenes. And gentlemen, you're coming off the heels of Media Day yesterday. How was it? How were the vibes? It almost feels like Media Day is that back to school. You see all your friends once again after the long summer.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate statement. It's good to actually get out there and see something that we can talk about that's, tangible, as opposed to just, making educated guesses like we do the entire off season. So yeah, you're right. It's like back to school. Students will be back, I guess, in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, it's about that time we actually get something real to talk about.
It's nice to get out there and be able to sort of just talk to the players in a normal setting. Like normally they're up at a press conference, and there was that aspect of it at Media Day, but then you can just go pull them aside in the indoor facility and just sort of talk to them like people. And that always produces better material. So as a reporter, I do enjoy that aspect of it, just sort of having that, one-on-one time where it doesn't feel so formal where you're sitting in a press conference talking to them. So some decent stuff to come out of that.
How about you, David? How was it yesterday?
It's good. I think Media Day is always nice because it's like the final. It's nice because it's the final time you get a chance to talk to all these guys where they don't have really much weight on their shoulders. Because as fall camp starts to roll along, as you grow closer to that opening kickoff, everybody kind of tenses up naturally. Now, I think this group might be a tad different just because so many returners and so many guys have been through this before, but it doesn't change the overall premise that more pressure accumulates the closer you get to the start of the season, and then everybody's in the season, and so like these are the most relaxed interviews you'll do for a long time. So it's nice to kind of get not unbiased, but just like a neutral, straight up, honest perspective from a lot of these guys before they really get into the grind of things. And this is kind of like the start of the beginning of the end, if you will. I mean, we'll be, it'll be now until the spring game, basically. So now we're finally underway. We're finally getting going, and it was good. I think it's an interesting offseason because, like we've talked about before, so quiet, not a whole lot going on, not a ton that came out of practice, not a ton that came out of the press conference period yesterday. Now, of course, we all got the chance to go and talk to a bunch of players one-on-one and stuff, and that always creates for some really good content. But it's an interesting off season, and I think yesterday was pretty good. Just we're back. That's the bottom line. It's nice to be back into the swing of things again.
We're going to dive a little bit deeper into, you guys also had the chance to check out practice on Friday, a little bit of a flair for the dramatics for the Hokies for the second year in a row. We're going to dive into that. So I'll ask you to hold off on that for just a second. Wanted to get your thoughts on Brent Pry's setup this year, thoughts on the 3-day burst mini camp format for this team, where they're going to go for 3 days, take a day off, reevaluate, go at it 3 days once again. He talked about that a little bit in his press conference, and it's also worth noting that full pads for the first time on Tuesday as well.
Well, I think that setup makes sense. I think it keeps people fresh. training camp can be a grind. I think it helps keep them mentally and physically fresh. And I think it does. It gives the coaches a chance to reevaluate. You always you don't really get that point back when teams did 2-a-days, or even if they weren't doing 2-a-days every day, they were doing them on some days. There was never really that point in the preseason where the staff could say, okay, let's really meet and talk about what we're doing here. Let's take a day and see if we need to change things up. There was never that chance. So I feel like this type of camp, you want to practice as much as possible, of course, and there's a certain number of days, right, that you can practice in the preseason.
I think so.
Yeah. So it's about how you use those allotted days, and I feel pretty good about how the Hokies are doing it this year.
Well, it's like anything. If you break it up into digestible bites, it's easier to get through than if you just go, all right, we're gonna have 12 straight days of practice. Like when you're on day 5, you're like, this is never gonna end. We're never gonna get to the end of this.
It's like chapters in a book. There's a reason they exist.
It breaks it up, and it breaks up the monotony of practice. So it's probably they've done this. I think the last 2 years they've done it this way. So it's probably it's a setup that works for this staff, and I think it works out pretty well.
So let's go back to Friday, right? Things did get a little bit chippy. You guys were there. Going back to Friday practice, you had a situation where the offensive line and the defensive line are starting to go at it. Walk us through the scuffle that transpired. We had an ejection from practice. I'm going to kind of let Andy take the reins here.
Well, yeah, it was just a little extracurricular activity after the whistle. Keyshawn Burgos, Parker Clemens kind of going at it, and Keyshawn took a swing at him after the whistle, and they had ACC refs on site, and they throw a flag and stuff, and Pride gets in there, and he's like, you're out, because the ACC officials said he would have been ejected in a real game if that happened, so they were treating it like a real game and threw him out of practice. And the same thing happened last year at practice when we were watching an inside run drill when Johnny Dixon got tossed from practice. So that's not, it happens. This is practice, and things, emotions run high, things get heated a little bit, and this inside run drill, we asked Pry about it afterwards. He's like, that's the reason we only do it for 5 minutes, is because it gets really intense and these guys get into it. And after the Burgos ejection, the defense really got into it, and like Kelly Lawson and Cole Nelson, there was some a level of trash talking that you don't normally hear at preseason practice. So it got really intense, and the defense was making plays, so it certainly lit a fire under them. And to put a bow on this, like Pry brought Burgos back out at the end of practice when he's breaking things down at the end. He's like, I want them to understand this isn't like a punishment thing. It's just to be smart, to keep your head in these situations. You can't have a situation where you lose your cool in a game, because that will be the end result as you get tossed. So it's not just some people like, oh my gosh, Keyshawn, you got to get it under control. It happens sometimes in football. You just have to control your emotions. And I think Price likes everything about Burgos and what he brings to the table, just wants him to rein it in a little bit. I think it was like, Brock Hoffman previously. He brought that edge, sometimes right up to the line, sometimes over the line. And when you go over the line, that's when it becomes a problem. So just rein that back a little bit. And I think they've got a pretty intense, very good player there.
Yeah, ultimately, you'd rather have to try to rein a guy in than try to push him forward and be more aggressive, right? So I think what I took away from that is I think there's a level of hungriness that's there that is good. We don't get to watch a lot of middle drill, of course, but I've been going to Virginia Tech football practices for 22 years now. And that's the most intense, most verbal, most physical middle drill that I've seen in a long time, like probably at least 10 years.
Since the one when J.C. Coleman simultaneously sprained both ankles in one play.
Yeah.
Where that happened.
Rough.
We didn't get to see that one. He sprained both ankles on the same play.
And they still played him. And they still played him against Western Carolina, and then he was pretty much useless for half the season.
It was a bad decision.
Bad decisions. But anyway, so I think there's a level of hungriness that this team has. And I think they know their weaknesses from last year. I think they know they weren't as physical and they weren't as intense as they needed to be against, some of the best teams on their schedule. Because often, that's the difference between, decent teams and really good teams, is the level of physicality and the level of intensity. And I think the coaching staff recognizes that, and they've taken steps in the offseason to address that. And you're seeing it carry over a little bit onto the practice field, which I think is a good thing. I think the most physical Virginia Tech football team that I've ever seen, at least especially on the defensive side of the ball, was 1995. And, Jeff Holland will tell you like that they used to get into fights in practice all the time back then, so to me, it's just a non-issue.
And the message boards were universally in favor of this.
Oh, yeah.
There are finally some dogs on this team. That's what we need. And so,
as long as it doesn't happen in a game. Can't happen in a game.
Well,
you can walk up to the line in the game. Just,
sure.
Once the whistle blows,
you can't have that 15 yards.
You play to the echo of the whistle.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. They say that these things are
Grove method of echo of the whistle.
Mm-hmm. One in the trenches, right? Got to be active in the trenches. Also, going back to that point on Friday with the scuff, I thought it was interesting. The big thing that stood out to me, Brent Pry kind of says, hey, go get your guy. And Cole Nelson jumps into action. He's the one carrying the lunch pail. Speak a little bit about how his leadership has come so apparent.
Yeah, I don't even think Pry had to say it. Cole just did it. And it's sort of, we asked him afterwards, is this sort of a new leadership thing he's taking on? It's like, yeah, he's taking more of that on. He's becoming more of that vocal type guy on the field. And you see that as guys move up to become seniors and the oldest guys in the room. So, impressive by him. He's the current keeper of the lunch pail. He has it right now, and I think he has it for a reason. You saw that the other day. And not only did he do that, then he comes out and he's one leading the charge back when they continued the drill.
Cole Nelson is a guy, it seems like people bet against him every year. Oh, he's not going to start this year. So-and-so is going to beat him out for the starting job. And then it just doesn't happen, right? He's just good at his job. To me, he's not flashy. He's Nikos Brown 2.0. Nikos Brown was a defensive end. He played back in the day with like Xavier Adebe and those guys. And he never stood out from a statistical standpoint, but whenever you watch the film, he always had his gap. He basically never made mistakes, and that's what Cole Nelson is. He's like Nikos Brown 2.0. And if you could fill your team with 11 starters who were as reliable as Cole Nelson, who did their job pretty much all the time, even if it's without flash, then you would be a very hard team to beat.
No doubt about it. I think another thing to kind of break down as well, he kind of exploded towards the back half of the season, so the play started to show, right? Ended up with 4.5 sacks, had 2 sacks against Virginia. I believe, Andy, you wrote in your article that all 4.5 came in the back 6, or 4 of the 4.5.
4 of the 4.5
came in the back 6
games. Strong last year, so you always kind of see guys start to develop at the end of their junior years and really can take off in their senior year. I think one of the famous examples is Woody Barron, where the second half of his junior year, it's like, okay, this guy's turning into something. And his senior year, nobody could block him. So I don't know if Cole Nelson's going to have that type of year, but I think when you put him in that defensive line room, which is a really deep group, and you have APR on the other side, you have Burgos behind him coming off the bench, and you have CJ McCray, it just feels like a good group that's going to get after the quarterback again this year. So I think Tech has to be feeling pretty good about its defensive line right now.
He also had 7.5 tackles for loss. Well, I wanted to ask you this, Andy, because you mentioned he's got the lunch pail. What does that mean exactly? Like, does he bring it home with him? Does it stay in his locker? He carries it out to practice, sure, but what does it mean to be the keeper of the lunch pail? Because I don't know if everybody in the fan base completely knows, and I don't know if we know.
Yeah, I think he carries it home.
I would think so.
Yeah, I think they take it with them all the time, or at least keep it in a safe place when they're at class or whatever. I guess they're not in class at this point, but they're the keeper of the pail. They hold it, and that's a very cherished thing in the program. So bring it out to the practice field. Everybody knows he has it. It's a big deal when they bestow this honor on them at a practice, a meeting before a practice or something like that. So, I mean, we've talked to some guys in the past. They've sort of gotten emotional about it. Like, I've always wanted to be the guy to carry that thing. So to do it, it's a big deal.
Who was it? Pry's first year was Chamari Connors, right? And then who was it this past season?
Well, it's not like a season-long thing. You
Okay.
get it, and then, every now and then somebody just kind of pops up and is playing really well or practicing really well or leading really well, and all of a sudden they get it. So, last year, Fuga had it for a stretch.
Mm-hmm. Probably Norrell Pollard at some point.
Norrell Pollard. I feel like Canteen maybe had it at one point.
Did Kendricks have it?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
It moves around
Yeah.
on the defense, and they try to do that. So, historically, I think there's only two people that have gotten like a a replication of the lunch pail, like one for them to actually take home at the end of the career. Daryl Tapp
Makes
was
sense.
the player, and then Charlie Wiles. And, Bud presented him with a lunch pail after he ended up, leaving Virginia Tech and, finding the opportunity at NC State. But he does have a lunch pail. So those are the two guys, I believe, that have a copy of it.
What is the story, Chris? What's inside the lunch pail? It's opposing turf, right?
It used to be back in the day. I don't know.
I think
what
it's still
what
they
do.
still have turf. I think they still have the names of the 2007 shooting in there. That was a big deal, and like a remembrance card. So it's a very emotional thing. It's something that's been around for a while.
I've never actually looked inside the lunch pail before. I've never had the opportunity. We should one day in the off season get the holder of the lunch pail on the podcast.
Get Cole Nelson come in for a Triumph
That's an
spotlight
idea.
or something like that
With the lunch pail in hand.
There you go.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, it like Andy said, it's a huge honor. Like, we've seen. I mean, God, you remember, they took the lunch pail away at some point a couple of years ago, and then it was a huge thing when Brent Pry brought it back. It was Fuentes last year. They took it away because they said they hadn't like played up to the standard of the defense.
Well, no, Pry did that, I believe.
No, I thought it was when Justin Hamilton was defensive coordinator, and they didn't want to put any added pressure on Hamilton.
Yeah,
to be the next
Hamilton.
Foster.
They decided to not do it, but I feel like there was something Pry did early on where he didn't feel like they were playing up to the standard of defense.
Right.
Maybe that was
It might have been that spring, but Shamari eventually got it, so they did bring it back at some point.
They had it opening day, Pry's first game at ODU, and Shamari Connors had
they did
had
bring
the
it back.
pail.
I just thought there was a stretch there where they did something defensive. It might have not have been the lunch pail.
I think it was the 2021 season, maybe 2020 and 2021 both. But yeah, it was basically revolved around Justin Foster retiring and Hamilton replacing him. And I think the idea was let's not try to put too much pressure on Justin Hamilton, a very young, inexperienced defensive coordinator, to replace, Bud Foster.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, Gio, though, is like the lunch pail has kind of symbolized this Virginia Tech defense for so long. When you had the iconic defenses in the 90s and the 2000s, I mean, that's kind of just the mentality they played with. And now you get to this point where you look at the coaching staff, and J.C. Price and Pearson Perello are both former players. Even some of the other staff members, Xavier Adibi, Jerron Gavea-Winslow,
Cam
Phillips. Some of those, and Phillips was obviously on the offensive side of the ball, but there are guys on staff who understands what it means. Brent Pry understands what it means. He was around as a GA. After 2007, they added the names of the April 16 victims in there, and yes, I think they used to collect opponent turf and throw it in there. I don't know if that's still a thing, but it kind of symbolizes what the Virginia Tech defense stands for, and it's a huge honor. And it's interesting, like kind of hops around. But if you talk to any of those guys and individual goals, a lot of them will say, "Hey, yeah, I want to carry the lunch pail." I remember talking to Dorian Strong, I think at some point last year, and he's like, I want to have the lunch pail at some point, right? Because they know how much it means from a leadership standpoint, and they know how much respect they gain when they have it in their possession.
Lunch pail trivia. It's always associated with Bud Foster. Bud Foster did not come up with the lunch pail. In 1995, he was co-defensive coordinator.
Helmation?
Well, no, with Rod Sharpless.
Oh.
Who actually found the lunch pail.
He found the lunch pail, brought it to practice.
I think his
he
mom
got it from
found
his
it like
mom. He brought it to practice.
garage sale or
Thought it'd be a good idea. So he introduced it to the program, and then after that season, he bounced for Rutgers. That was back when Rutgers and Virginia Tech, it wasn't a huge difference in terms of stature, but I think he got like the full-time defensive coordinator job at Rutgers instead of just But anyway, but yeah, Rod Sharpless introduced the lunch pail to Virginia Tech, and then Foster took over the defense completely the next year, and and made it his after that.
Isn't Bud's in the north end zone where they have the retired numbers? Isn't Bud Foster's flag? Isn't it a picture of the lunch pail?
It is.
I think
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, let's flip gears just a little bit here. We are going to get back to talking X's and O's, talking football, but wanted to bring up the fact that the NCAA has a new rule in place, and Virginia Tech has added titles to their 11 analysts, hoisting them into these coaching roles now. Brent Pry had alluded to being amongst some of the first schools in the country to take advantage of this rule. He said there were about 11 to 12 schools that had done it before. He kind of took a look at their model and picked and choose what was right for Virginia Tech. But besides the job titles on the name card on the desk, what are the differences here? I think my biggest takeaway was the fact that there's a lot more opportunity for this one-on-one coaching, and you can kind of break things up even further and have more individualistic work.
Yeah,
Sort of. I mean, this is just formalizing what has always been a thing. I mean, these guys have coached before. I mean, it's
you cannot say that, Andy.
You're right. Exactly. You think Alabama has this army of former head coaches, and they're just sitting there poring over film all the time. Like, come on now. These guys have always coached. It's just the NCAA formalizing what has been in practice for a long time. I remember when Jerry Kill was here. And he was essentially the running backs coach. He was special assistant to the head coach. Insert the Dwight Schrute joke for whatever the title you want there. But he was basically the running backs coach when he came in, sort of displaced Zon Burden, who was in that role. And Deshaun McLeese, one time we were talking to him in a press conference setting, and what kind of impacts has Jerry Kill had? And he's like, when I come off the field, I go straight to Coach Kill, and he's telling me what I'm doing right and wrong and stuff. And then, the SID at Tech at the time was like, I think what Deshaun meant to say was this. So it's like, actually, okay, we know what's going on here. So, they can talk about, this is, upsetting the system, and we're going to change everything around and these titles. I think it's just, this is what they were before. Now they have new titles, and they're actually, they don't have to hide the coaching that they're doing on the field when the media is out there watching.
Yeah, so two stories. All right, so we had Grant Wells on the podcast before last season started. We had him out there in the other room off the record talking to him before the podcast, and we were talking about quarterback coaching, and he's like, and we asked him specifically about Bowen, and he was like, oh, well, Coach Chris handles all the technique work, And then the first time I ever laid eyes on Brent Davis was at a spring practice, and I tapped David on the shoulder. I said, who's the bald guy coaching the offensive line, right?
That's true.
So this is semantics.
Yeah,
semantics.
It's been going on for it's been going on for a while. But this is in June, the NCAA basically saying no more gray area. Anybody's allowed to coach, and I think what that does is, you don't need all these guys with analyst titles, and that's what it's trying to clear up, right? Before, you had guys with quality control and player development and player personnel and analyst titles, and now you see Virginia Tech 11 title changes. Most of those were actual promotions, and then with Gunter Brewer, they basically just added added a title, more of a title to him. But with a lot of those guys, some of those guys were graduate assistants, a guy like Cam Phillips, Austin Fields, who helps coach the offensive line, and now those guys are assistant wide receivers coach and stuff like that. I think it benefits everybody. It benefits those guys, the coaches. Brent Pry talked about the opportunity for promotion within the program now. Now it's kind of tiered a little bit more, which I think, if you're Brent Pry and you're in a leadership CEO type position, you always want to give your employees or your staff members an opportunity to be promoted. At the same time, yes, there is an opportunity for more one-on-one coaching, but again, it's not like they weren't doing this before. But what I do think is interesting is how it's going to be very interesting to see how other programs use this, because one of the points Sean Quinn made to me yesterday was oh, well, we already had all these really talented people in place, which kind of hints at Virginia Tech was probably utilizing those people in proper positions anyway. But it's not like Tech had to go out and hire a bunch of people to fill these roles, right? You give Cam Phillips a title change. Some of your other analysts, Brent Davis, right? He just becomes co-offensive line coach. And when I'm watching the offensive line yesterday, and I was talking to Caden Moore, this allows Tech to do legally is they split up the offensive line into 3 groups, and everybody's, Caden Moore and some of the older guys are working with one coach, and some of the younger guys are working with another, and the middle guys are working with the third coach. And every day they're mixing and matching, and you get a different voice in your head. So it's an opportunity across the board, whether it's the linebackers working with Xavier Deeby, wide receivers talking to Cam Phillips, and those guys were like, oh man, like Jalen Lane was like, dude, like listening to just Cam Phillips talk about his technique and all the little details, like it kind of mesmerizing. It only benefits the players, and you do get more voices in your head, more in a good way, more feedback and stuff, and so it is interesting. I think Virginia Tech has kind of jumped ahead of the curve a little bit in this, which is, Brent Price said about 10 to 12 schools have done it. So
every time that option game gets cooking, you guys can thank Brent Davis for that, no doubt.
Triple option.
I think something that's gone untalked about is the fact that Cam Phillips on the staff now, of course, he has the official title. Like these wide receivers, this wide receiver room that went from almost 0 to hero. Now it's probably the best position group on the team, arguably. They also get to learn from the program's leading receiver in both receptions and yards. I mean, that's huge. That goes back to the whole family thing and I don't think that gets appreciated enough.
I remember when Cam was a recruit and I watched his film for the first time, and it was very, very good. He was so advanced technically. DeMatha guy. I always thought he was a sure thing because I knew he would come in disciplined and he had been well coached and things like that. So it's actually not surprising that he's gotten into coaching with his background. So I definitely think someone, he's a young guy. I mean, Mines is young, but Phillips is even younger. So it is kind of like having a older player out there coaching to a certain extent. And he had a cup of coffee in the NFL too. Caught a few passes for the Bills, I believe. So yeah, I think it's
an XFL. Like
legend.
MVP caliber to play.
Dominant,
he was incredible
XFL
in that
player.
league.
Yeah. No, the only issue is, of course, making sure you don't have too many Chiefs, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that you're not teaching technique styles that conflict. Right, this offensive line coach is teaching this, and this offensive line coach is teaching that. But as long as they put their heads together and come up with the right plan and talk about that in advance, then it shouldn't be an issue. And I want to be clear here that we're not accusing Virginia Tech of doing anything nefarious over the last few years. We're just saying that that's the type of stuff that's going on, that has been going on across the country.
No, every school did it.
Every school.
That's why they eliminated it, because it's just such a really this is the rule. Nobody's enforcing this, and make it legal.
For a while there at Pitt, and this is why you should always you always should have your compliance people on your side. Make sure your compliance people like you. But remember Pitt, they blew a special whistle or something like that for all their analysts to quit coaching whenever a compliance person was showing up on the practice field or something like that, right? And that story's like 3 or 4 years old. So this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah, Gio, one more thing.
Sure.
Chris talks about having everybody on the same page, and I think that's where kind of the general leadership from Brent Pry comes into play. We're Pry was like, I don't want to just promote guys, give guys titles, put guys in roles, right? I want to do it if it makes sense. Having a guy like Cam Phillips helping out Fontel Mines, I think it's a pretty good relationship there, and they're on the same page. Same with Austin Fields and Brent Davis were already helping out, being a sounding board for Ron Crook. It makes sense for them to have a hand in helping that offensive line group. I don't believe there's anybody helping the running backs room, but at the same time, that's a group of four to 6 guys now. I think that was one of the positions that didn't have one. Brian Christ already kind of had a hand, as Chris said, in that. So you're seeing guys who, it's not like Virginia Tech just said, okay, hey, you have, you're now going to be helping out with this position group. And something Stu Holt talked about, he's special teams coordinator and tight ends coach. he's got to be in two places at once during a lot of practices. So now he's got somebody to help him out on the tight end side and help him out on the special teams side. So it helps everything run smoothly, and for somebody like him.
I want to throw one name out there. And David wrote an article yesterday. You can see it on the TSL homepage that goes over every single extra Virginia Tech coach that has gotten their promotion to actual coaching titles now. But there's one guy on here who actually came in the spring, kind of under the radar, Mike Moisinko. And I was researching him yesterday. He is technically associate tight ends coach. I looked him up. He's been a running backs coach, a full-time running backs coach, quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinator, play caller. A number of different schools, including like UConn.
Yeah.
Like he was UConn, I believe, their quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator for a couple of years. So he's a guy that on the staff who, yes, he's associate tight ends coach. He could pretty much help out at just probably every single position on offense, and is very valuable from that standpoint. So, and I think you've got a few guys, like that on the staff. Gunnar Brewer, obviously, with his experience as a coach, he can help out anywhere. So it's I'm not saying I'm going to remember all these guys' names because this is what they're throwing at me now. I'm always our numbers guy. I keep up with the 85 scholarships and how Virginia Tech's going to distribute them, and I know a lot about the coaches. Well, you've basically just doubled the coaches on me and adding 20 scholarships on me. I'm not getting any younger here, man. It's going to be very difficult to keep up with all this stuff, but I'll give it a go.
Here's a nugget of trivia for you. Who was Cam Phillips' head coach at DeMatha Catholic?
Was it Elijah?
It was Elijah Brooks.
Elijah Brooks.
How about that?
Was it really?
Yeah, I just had to look that up because I knew that Elijah Brooks was there. I was like, what did they cross over? And
how about that?
Elijah Brooks was the head coach there from 2011 to 2018. Cam Phillips was a part of the, I want to say 2000 and let's see, he was a part of the 2014 class.
Man, I wish I'd known that before Media Day yesterday.
Definitely
been a cool story.
Should have done this podcast before that.
I know.
I guess so. Well, we talked about the narrative at ACC kickoff and how this team went into it saying, hey, we're blocking out the noise. This is all noise. It's the same noise as when they started 1-3 that it is now. It just sounds a little bit different, right? Okay, but now you come home. It's not the national media. It's the local media. It's familiar faces. Was it the same mask? Was it the same approach, or were things a little bit different yesterday?
I thought it was pretty similar.
Yeah, I didn't sense any tone shift or anything like that from the players. And like I said, it's easy to say all this stuff in the off season, but if you get into the actual season, start having some success, that's when you start hearing it more. I mean, everybody's praising you in the preseason, because that's what they do every preseason. That's just, everybody feels good about their team going into the year because you haven't lost a game yet. But it's when you get into the actual season, actually get some results, and if they can string together a couple wins early in the season. The coaches poll came out the other day. They were effectively 28th, third in the others receiving votes. So it would not take much at the beginning of the season, especially with the volatility there at the back end of the poll, to jump into that pretty quickly. And then all of a sudden, once you see a number next to your name in the polls, then it feels a little bit different. It's like, all right, maybe you're actually accomplishing something. That's I think when you really have to guard against it. Like, are we as good as this number next to our name indicates? I think that's a real challenge for coaches sometimes.
Do you think that that was the coaches poll? Do you think in the AP poll, Tech will be a top 25 team?
About the same.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I said, once you get past 18, 19, all the teams are pretty much the same for the next 20. So it depends on who gets the votes in a certain week. Pretty much guarantee that Miami will be in there. I don't think Virginia Tech, if they are, they'll be 23rd, 24th, 25th, somewhere there. And if they're not, they're basically effectively the same thing. So, polls.
But it feels different with the number.
It does, but the way the season starts off, and Vanderbilt, ODU, Marshall, is that the order? Or Marshall, ODU?
Marshall, ODU.
Okay,
those three.
Or maybe okay.
No, it's Vanderbilt Road, Marshall home, ODU Road.
Okay,
yeah.
I mean those are 3 winnable games off the bat, and you think of all the teams that will lose games ahead of them. You could jump up there very quickly. It wouldn't surprise me if they're ranked in September at some point.
I mean, they're going to have a number next to their name when Rutgers comes to town, in my opinion.
If they handle their business,
yes.
I mean, it's assuming a lot with a trip to Norfolk right before that.
Yeah.
Fair. I think there's a chance after week 1, just because I get it's Vanderbilt, but it's an SEC opponent, and you got to go do it on the road. It's not in Lane. I feel like there's a little bit of weight to going on the road. Granted, it's going to be hopefully 75% or more Hokie fans taking over.
I was watching. They were showing the Wake Forest Vanderbilt game on the ACC network yesterday or the day before, and I was watching it at the gym, some of it, and Wake just thumped them, man. Last year, like Mitch Griffith's out there looking like an All-American against Wake Forest or against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is bad. All right, they're like worse than that Virginia team that Virginia Tech smacked at the end of last season. If there's an issue in that game, it's going to be because of Virginia Tech, not because of Vanderbilt.
They wear the SEC patch. Everybody's like, SEC school.
God.
But if you're picking an SEC school to play, Vanderbilt is the one that you would choose.
Absolutely, and you get that trip to Nashville for the fan base as well,
And for your birthday.
and for my birthday. It's going to be a good time. What were maybe some of the favorite media days? Always full of like a quote here, a nugget there. Anything that stood out to you guys that you wanted to bring up?
I'm trying to think. I went through and asked everybody the same question. I do the same thing every year. Go to a lot of the upperclassmen and say, name one young guy that people haven't really thought about yet who's standing out. Name somebody on each side of the ball. And so a lot of guys said Reddish. A few guys said Emmett Laws. A lot of guys said Chance Wiggins.
Okay.
He was not as highly ranked as Keelan Adams, the other wide receiver
That's right.
in the class. But when I got out there and actually started asking the players about it, the ones that named a wide receiver, to a man, they all said Chance Wiggins, and the only other one that got mentioned was Aiden Green, who doesn't really count since he played last year. So that was my takeaway. I knew there was a little bit of hype around Wiggins building up, and he's probably not going to play this year because he's just not going to be a need. But he is making some noise behind the scenes, and he won't get a lot of recognition this year because he's probably not going to play, and there's so many other wide receivers to talk about. But the early stages of his career are promising.
Yeah, I kind of took a different tack this year, whereas in the past I tried to hit as many people as possible and notes and quotes in here. And this time I was going to go, I'm going to do one offensive story and one defensive story. So I kind of focused on wide receivers and defensive line, and both those stories will be come out in the next week. But, talking to some of the wideouts, I was curious where this Bad Boys nickname came from. Apparently, Ali Jennings and Daquan Felton came up with it after they had committed to Virginia Tech, and Fontel Mines like, we need a team, like a nickname for this group or something like that. And so I asked Ali what some of the non-winning nicknames were. And he said, like Men in Blacksburg. So I guess they were on like a Will Smith kick because they chose Bad Boys eventually. He's like the Avengers was another one, and they settled on Bad Boys. So I don't have the entire list, but those were a couple of them.
Bad Boys is definitely the best out of that.
Yeah, of those three.
What?
I mean, this is the school they had the Untouchables back in the day.
Yes, I was about to bring that up. Now, I was in school at the time.
Wait, I mean, they had the Untouchables, but Jones, Suggs, and Harmony was sitting right there.
It was.
They could have gone with that. It would have been so much better.
They actually let people vote on that.
I know. That's why they chose the one that wasn't as cool as Jones, Suggs,
I know.
and
They
Harmony.
let people vote on it, and then they gave Jones and Suggs a list of the top vote getters, and they got to pick it in the end. But yeah, they decided on the Untouchables.
That the Untouchables is iconic. Like that, I think that one's. I know you like the Jones, Suggs, and Harmony, but I think the Untouchables is great.
I mean, it's not like the movie just came out. The movie was 15 years old or whatever at that point. So I don't know.
Anything for you, David? Any nuggets that stood out at Media Day?
Yeah, I mean, I did something that people don't talk about a lot. I went and talked to all the special teams guys. Like, they're super nice guys. They're kind of quiet, as you might expect.
They're not used to being interviewed.
Yeah, I mean, now Peter Moore, right? I mean, he's been around the program for a long time, and he's a captain, and we've talked to him a bunch. But I talked to like John Love and Kyle Lowe, and John Love just finished his freshman year. He's very, 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 very shy, very quiet. But just talking to those guys about what's it like to have everybody in the special teams unit coming back. I'm going to write a story on them either Friday or early next week. Everybody's talking about the offense and the defense, but the Hokies have, they're two kickers, so their kickoff specialist and their place kicker, and they have their punter, and they have the guy who long snapped at the end of the season back, along with their main kickoff returner and their top two punt returners, even though one of them is banged up right now. So, and you basically, and I talked to Stu Holt and was kind of like, what is, in terms of the guys who play special teams, that aren't the actual specialists, the guys who are on the kick team or on the punt team or whatnot, do those guys, like, how often do those guys rotate over? And he's like, it kind of depends. So, I think that is an interesting angle too. It's like special teams can sometimes define a game. Missed field goal, bad punt, bad kickoff return, punt return for a touchdown, right? Virginia Tech has a lot of experience. Basically gets everybody back in that area last year. John Love was money for most of the year. Bashal Tootin had a couple kick returns for a touchdown. Jalen Lane would have had one against Boston College, a punt return for a touchdown, had it not been called back. We know what Tucker Holloway can do. So I think that area, it's not something you talk about a lot because it's not flashy, but that is a very crucial area that will impact Virginia Tech this year. And, that was kind of the main thing I focused on outside of, I talked to Ron Crook, offensive line, a little bit, and talked to some of the linebackers after writing the story on all the title changes. But I think special team is going to be really, really interesting this year, especially when you got a guy like Bashal Tootin returning kicks. I mean, that can be a game changer for a team that could take you from good to potentially great.
I think that I've never felt better about their returning units, even without Tucker Holloway. Jalen Lane, obviously Bashal Tootin with what he was able to do last year. Kind of piggybacking off that, let's give everybody a little bit of an injury update. Seems like with Tucker Holloway, a redshirt possibility is on the table, depending on how things look. He has not participated yet, but Steven Gosnell was wearing the non-contact blue, had a sleeve over the leg, seems to be getting back into things, and then Nick Gallo seems to be almost back to 100%.
Gosnell seems like he's going to come out of that sleeve very quickly. I mean, just watching him run, he was not running like an injured guy.
He said he's still got a couple weeks in blue. I mean, he's, 8 months, less than 8 months removed from an ACL tear.
It's kind of surprising that he's back and he looks this good this soon.
Well, everybody I talked to was amazed. They're like, as soon as he was injured, he's like, I'm going to be back in 6 months. And they're like, okay, come on. And then he was. They're like, do you have some sort of supernatural healing powers here? Like, I don't understand how you got back.
The scar on his knee is huge from his surgery.
So, I mean, everybody I talked to, like, he's different about that stuff. And he's just like attacked the rehab and looks like he could be back and ready to go for the start of the season.
That would be huge. I mean, that just adds more depth to a loaded wide receiver. He started to come on a little bit towards the back half of there. I mean, he's a good very, very good player.
No, he's one of those guys. Virginia Tech has so many good wide receivers, and they're a run-heavy team, so receivers aren't going to catch a lot of passes. I forget how many he caught last year, maybe like 14 or 15 or something like that. But for a team that threw the ball more, he would probably be a 25, 30 catch guy. He's a good player.
It felt like every time Kyron kind of got caught up, which didn't happen a lot, but running around like scramble drill, who got open, who got the ball? Steven Gosnell.
He always seemed to find an open spot.
Yeah.
22 catches, 348 yards, and scored 3 touchdowns. He got in the end zone.
But those 3 touchdowns came like the last 4 weeks or something.
The one
like
against
that.
UVA was beautiful. The play. That was the first touchdown of the game.
That was nice. And then he got hurt in the Military Bowl.
Yes.
So that's tough. Those slick conditions. I mean, it was like
it was non-contact,
begging for somebody to get hurt, right?
It felt like there were a lot of times last season, especially late down the stretch, where like if Kyron Drones needed to complete a pass on 3rd down, it was like Steven Gosnell's right there. He's not the flashiest guy in that room, obviously. Kind of, I don't want to say underlooked, but like I think people know Ollie Jennings, Jalen Lane, DeQuan Felton more. But don't underrate Steven Gosnell. I mean, he's quietly like kind of a solid glue piece to that room.
He doesn't have like an elite trait, but he's just solid across the board. He doesn't do anything bad.
Yeah. I'd have to agree with you there. How big do you think having Nick Gallo back can be? Was never a huge receiving tight end. Do you see that in his game at all? Because the one spot, and I don't even think it's that big of a loss, but the one spot that is missing on the offense that wasn't there last year, besides, of course, Ali, is Daquan Wright, who's going to be suiting up for the Ole Miss Rebels.
Yeah, he's a talented pass catcher, Daquan Wright. So that is a loss, but at the same time, you bring back Ollie Jennings, albeit at a different position. So to me, the question is, how often do you use 2 tight end formations? How often do you use 3, 4 wide receivers? Because you seem to have more pass catchers at wide receiver than you do pass catchers at tight end. Gallo can certainly help, his experience level, his blocking, and things like that. But at the same time, like, I think the 2 tight ends behind him have a higher ceiling. Like, I think Benji Gosnell, the other Gosnell, I think he's going to play a lot this year. And I think he's probably got the highest ceiling. You just got to keep him healthy. He had, he tore his ACL back-to-back years, and I think he's battled a shoulder injury or something.
Yeah, he's basically like the operation board guy.
Yes, yeah. Like, it's amazing he's
under
good,
the knife quite a bit.
as little as football as he's played the last 3 years. It's amazing he's as good as he is. But I think if he can stay healthy, if he can find a window where he's healthy and just play consistent football, then I think he can really take off as he gains experience.
Yeah, I think in that room, I mean, Gallo's never a huge pass catcher
Right.
in this offense. So I think he comes back. It's nice to have that veteran presence. But I think you saw in the Military Bowl, pretty good shape with Gosnell and Harrison St. Germain. They both got touchdowns in that game, I believe.
Yes.
That bodes well for the future of that position. So they lose a lot of pass catching ability, but like you said, I think you make up for that at a different position with Ali Jennings coming back in that group.
And this is what we talk about when it comes to NIL and deciding where to spend your money. Like, there has to be a strategy to it. So from my understanding is Wright was looking for more than Virginia Tech was willing to give him. And it's not because they couldn't give it to him. It's because they said, well, if he leaves, we've got like 3 other good tight ends.
Yeah.
Right? So we can redistribute that money, the extra money, somewhere else and get better at another position because we've already got the tight end depth, right? It's new era roster management.
You have to. I mean, that's the changing game. Well, as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs, including free checking. Visit firstbankand.com to find the account that is right for you. All right, we're going to have an offensive and then defensive entire podcast on the offense, entire podcast on the defense, full-fledged preview. That being said, wanted to bring up the linebackers with you, Chris, and wanted to talk specifically about the 3 different linebacker positions that truly exist. The depth chart's starting to clear up for us a little bit. Wanted to have you paint that picture. And what is there to like specifically about Sam Brumfield at the mic? And what is there to be weary of? Because no player's perfect.
Yeah, he's awesome against the run when he was at Middle Tennessee. Even played well against teams like Missouri and Georgia last year. So I don't have any concerns with him against the run. Got exploited a little bit in pass coverage, so you've got to figure out what you want to do there. But, generally speaking, Virginia Tech's best returning linebacker is Jaden McDonald, and who, by the way, has cut his hair. So him and his brother look totally different.
Yeah,
now.
you can tell them apart.
You can actually tell them apart, yeah. But anyway, so to me, the 2 best linebackers on the team, as far as proving it on the football field thus far in their careers, are now playing the same position because they've moved McDonald to Mike. And they wanted to get 3 scholarship, or they wanted to, not because Balance is the 3rd string Mike. He's not scholarship at this point, but I assume he will be next year. But they wanted to even out their depth chart. You don't have enough reps to get 4 guys good reps at one spot, and then just 2 at the other. So it's all about balancing the depth chart. But if McDonald turns out to be one of their top 2 linebackers again this year, does he go back to Will? Because that's a position he played all of last year and played well at it down the stretch. At the Will spot, you've got Jaden Keller, who every year they're like, man, this is it. This is Jaden Keller's year. He's about to break out, and then it doesn't happen. He definitely looks the part. He's always looked the part, but he looks even better this year. He's a guy who didn't play a lot of defense in high school. So that could explain a little bit why it's taken him a little while. But behind him, you've got Caleb Woodson, and I thought it was interesting that he was getting the reps ahead of Kelly Lawson at practice on Friday. You just have to recall that Lawson was hurt in the spring and had surgery.
It was the same yesterday, too.
It was the same yesterday. Okay. So there's going to be an odd man out there. You got, even Price said this down in Charlotte. You got 5 guys for two spots, basically. And they're going to rotate at both spots. 4 guys are going to play, somebody's not. Which one of those guys that I just named is not going to play this year? If it turns out to be Caleb Woodson, then you need to redshirt him. Because what good does it do? You don't get as many reps as a third-string linebacker. And just like that, he'd be a junior next year having hardly played at all, right?
Yeah.
And it's a tough transition to go from outside linebacker to inside linebacker. And you'd get separation between him and those guys around him because right now he's a sophomore, a true sophomore, and they're redshirt juniors. So I'm just going to be interested to see how that battle shakes out between those 4 guys because, like Price said, there's going to be an odd man out. Could
you see them maybe taking Brumfield off in some of these obvious passing situations, 3rd and long, and play more of a nickel?
Yeah, absolutely. There were times when Pry was at Penn State where they would take the mic off, slide the star inside the mic, and then bring in a nickel during passing downs. That was at Penn State though when their star was big, was an actual linebacker. That's not the case now because Virginia Tech's star is more like a safety with Keontae Jenkins, so he couldn't really slide down and cover that mic spot even on passing downs. But you certainly could do something there. Like,
who would it be? Who would you put there in that situation?
I might just. I always found it odd that you take off Keontae Jenkins, a coverage guy, in his own right to bring in a nickel. Does it really help you that much? So I don't know. There's a lot to figure out there. You could bring in McDonald on passing downs. Now McDonald's going to be playing a lot anyway. So again, that's something that's gonna. There was never a set way of doing things when Pry was at Penn State. It just all depended on his personnel. And I think it's going to be the same at Virginia Tech.
You know who would solve this situation if they had a guy like Micah Parsons?
That's true. Yeah.
Did you know that Brent Pry coached Micah Parsons?
Let's go out and get one off our Micah Parsons tree in the backyard. There's so many of them. Yeah.
If I coached Micah Parsons like Brent Pry did, I would also mention it at every opportunity too. So he makes it very known that he coached Micah Parsons when he was at Penn State.
You have to, right? You got to promote yourself a little bit. Do you think there's potential for Jaden Keller? You talked about how he's always looked the part, seems to have taken it to another level as far as looking the part goes this year. Him playing the will, opportunity to maybe be the most improved player on the defense?
I think so. I think the athletic ability is there, the natural talent, the strength, the speed, all that. He's a smart guy from everything I've always been told. But it's just there's a lack of experience there. You go back and watch his highlight tapes from his senior year in high school, and it's all offensive plays. Like, I'm not even sure he was playing defense. It's like Caleb Farley never played defense until he got to Virginia Tech.
Which is insane. Because he's an NFL corner.
Right, exactly. And, he didn't play well as a redshirt freshman at corner. He didn't take off till he was a redshirt sophomore. And corner's a much easier position to play than inside linebacker. There's just not as much going on around you as a cornerback. It's a huge adjustment as an inside linebacker if you've never played it before. So I think Keller's one of those guys. Like, I could definitely see him coming on and having a great season. But I'm also not one of those guys that makes the same mistake 3 times in a row, so I'm not going to predict it to happen. I could also see him in the end being the odd man out, even though he's first string right now.
Well, he's a redshirt junior.
Yeah.
So he's in his 4th year in the program, and sometimes it just takes time for the light to click with some of these guys. I think if it doesn't happen this year, it's probably not going to. At a certain point, it's sort of like now or never. I feel like it's a now or never situation with him, especially with some of the younger, linebackers coming up. You mentioned Woodson previously, so I think this is his time. I think if he's going to make it happen, it's going to have to be now, and certainly they're giving him the opportunity.
I'm glad he's back at will, because I don't think Mike was a great fit for him. Like, he didn't know what to do on the field last year, but he's at a position where he has to tell other people what to do. I think that just tied up his feet even more. So I think playing him at will free him up a little bit. He's not going to have to think quite as much.
If you're an X's and O's kind of guy, there's a little bit of taste of what our full offensive and defensive position by position preview pods are going to look like. So there's a little taste of that. David, what you got for us?
I was just going to ask Chris, where do you feel like Caleb Spencer kind of fits into the mix right now? He's the number 2 star.
Yeah, I was impressed with him. Very small sample size on Friday. So let's stress that. The smallest sample size we could possibly have. But he did grab an interception in one-on-one drills. Caught it with his hands. Real nice play. Granted, that was against a walk-on tight end.
Ivan snapped a pic of that, too, didn't he?
Got several in a row of it. Really great sequence. And then, he had a tackle right around the line of scrimmage in middle drill as well. Now, that's a lot different because we haven't seen him in game-like situations, scrimmage-like situations. In middle drill, you know exactly what's coming. You know it's not going to be a pass play, and you know it's going to be a running play between the tackles. So you can just kind of tee off. Middle drill is just about being physical. It's not about mental, diagnosing the play or anything like that. And then those one-on-one passing drills, again, you know it's going to be a pass. And you probably even, if you practice enough, you kind of know what routes are coming after a while too, so it becomes a lot easier. What's his knowledge level of the defense? Because he was not here in the spring. Physically, I think he looks pretty good. He looks the part. And Virginia Tech will need an heir apparent there next year with Keontae Jenkins gone.
Yeah, I asked Sean Quinn about Spencer yesterday, and he said Tech really wanted Spencer out of high school. Obviously, he went to Miami, and then kind of second time around, kind of the perfect match, and kind of said some similar things, like they're still trying to figure him out. They just haven't had him very, very long at all. So yeah, I'm interested to see where he factors in, because last year there wasn't really much of a drop off with Caleb Woodson. Caleb Woodson played pretty well when he was called upon. But now Caleb Woodson's not there. So if Keontae Jenkins comes off the field, and Jenkins was banged up at times last year, so that's going to be an interesting role if Spencer can fill it.
Yeah, and I want a little bit of a background on Spencer. He's originally from Gloucester, which is just across the bridge, the Coleman Memorial Bridge, from York County, where David's from. Spent most of his high school career there, and then played his last season at LCA, which is outside of Richmond. And I was very concerned because almost all LCA kids at this level of football over the last 5, 6, 7 years have all turned out to be busts. And a lot of them have academic trouble, and they get, we've seen it here. Like Hotman was here for a year, and boom, now he's gone, and he's playing for Charlotte. And so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, if it ever happens for an LCA kid, it needs to happen now with Caleb Spencer, because at some point one of those kids has to work out. So hopefully it works out for him. I had heard through the grapevine that there are some coaches out there in the 757 who were familiar with him, who really liked him as a football player, and maybe wish he hadn't gone to LCA for that last year. So pretty optimistic about him right now. I'm not saying he'll definitely get on the field a lot this year, because he's got to learn the defense. He's a true sophomore. He's not that much. He's a true sophomore. Wasn't here for the spring. Still a young player who doesn't know the scheme. So I think he's going to back up Jenkins this year, but he's a guy who by this time next year is going to have much more knowledge in the system, and I would project to be the starting star at this point.
Well, it's kind of what happens when you're the top team at the Power 4 level and returning starters from a year ago, right? Like I was having this conversation with Carter Hill yesterday, driving back from the ballpark, and we're looking through the transfer portal rankings, and Virginia Tech was 77th, right? And you got all these schools above them, and I'm like, it doesn't matter. They didn't need to bring anybody in. They brought like 7 guys.
Yeah. It would have been nice to get a safety, right?
Sure, but you got your Mike linebacker you needed.
Right. You got a couple 2 or 3 defensive tackles that you needed. I mean, you filled your needs basically. You could argue that one more offensive lineman would have been nice. I would definitely want a safety, but for the most part, they did fine in the portal. And again, rankings are dumb. Like seriously, I think it's just like any other recruiting rankings. Once you get past a certain point, you just shouldn't pay attention to them. I think it's like there's a reason in baseball why they just do the top 100 prospects and then that's it. Right? There's no reason to sit here and say, oh, the Phillies' 16th ranked prospect is a 3-star guy, and we give him a 0.874 rating, and that makes the Phillies, it makes their prospect system one spot higher than the Nationals or whoever. That's dumb. Just give me the top 100 guys, and everybody else is kind
You
of
clearly don't read too much Keith Law, because he will rank all the systems.
Does he really?
And go deep into all the
You
players.
can rank the
and stuff.
systems, but like, there's no. Yeah, I guess Keith Law does that, but as far as the rankings, I think most people just pay attention to the top 100. That's not the case in college recruiting.
We got to get you out to a Salem Sox game. We hooked Andy and the family up a couple of weeks
Right,
back.
good seats.
Good seats. I'm
Good
glad.
seats down there.
I'm glad. You could have sat
It
anywhere.
was bark at the park too, and so there were all these dogs around us, which was entertaining.
Was that your daughter's first ever baseball game or no?
No, she's
Okay.
gone to a couple.
Okay.
And
Because recently you went to a major league game.
we went to
right?
a Twins game.
There you go.
Pretty good seats too,
Sweet.
behind the dugout on Twin side. So I don't know if she likes baseball necessarily, but she tolerates it.
I'm sure the dogs barking in the park was enjoyable.
Oh, it was nice. Well, there was this Shetland sheepdog in front of us, and I had a Sheltie when I was younger, so he looked exactly like my childhood dog Rusty sitting in front of us. So I got a kick out of that. But yeah, there was this other dog that just throughout the game was just barking. It's like, well, yeah, it's a dog in a ballpark. Like, what do you think's going to happen? Bring a dog
Around
there.
lots of other dogs.
Exactly.
Aren't you glad you're not a White Sox fan?
Oh,
Is
it 22 yet?
No,
Or is it
they
21?
won.
They won.
Oh,
they won a
they
baseball game.
snapped it at
21
21
game losing streak. That's
Wow.
really hard to accomplish.
Did
in
they beat the
baseball.
A's?
Beat the A's.
Of course.
Of course, the absolute garbage fire of a series there. Something had to give. So, but the A's have been winning a little bit lately. With that being said, it's like 15 of 34 or something. But that's something for Oakland.
Coming back.
Coming back.
Maybe they'll stay now.
Did you guys see yesterday that this is the last thing that has anything to do with baseball? I saw on my phone that Billy Bean passed away, and I was like, the guy from Moneyball,
The
different Billy Bean.
Different Billy Bean.
Yeah, I spelled differently. Caught everybody off
It took
guard.
me a minute.
It took you a minute too.
What?
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
that's been Baseball Corner on the TSL podcast.
There we go. All right, the Hokies picked to finish 6th in the ACC according to the media. Where did you guys rank Virginia Tech in your ACC polls, and which one of you goobers picked Boston College to win the league?
I thought it was interesting some of the teams that got first place votes. Like, didn't Georgia Tech get one?
Cal got a handful.
We always do this every year, though. Like, what's the point of doing the poll if everybody's just going to pick the teams that you expect them to pick? I
But
mean,
Boston College.
okay,
come on.
well, one year Pitt got one vote and won the league
They did
over
win it,
Wake
yeah,
Forest, which
yeah.
got no votes. It was picked to finish
Yep,
5th in the
that's
division. And if you go to the preseason, you go, oh, who picked Pitt? What is this ridiculousness? They picked Pitt. It's like, well, they were right in the end. I mean, that's what this poll's for, is for a diversity of thought from writers from around the conference. And yeah, you're going to get some weird picks in there, but that's what makes the poll the poll. Otherwise, if we know who's going to be the order, why even do the poll?
Andy's right.
Andy needs like a mic drop.
Yeah, that was bars.
Yeah, I think you go back to 1999. Virginia Tech got a first place vote, not in the Big East, but in the whole country. They got a first place vote in the preseason poll, and people are like, I don't know about that. Well, they played for the national title that year. The guy was almost right. So you never know. It's easy to make fun of. I certainly would not have Boston College.
Well, the BC
first,
got a
but-
first place vote, and they still finished 14th
Right.
in the rankings.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the consensus was they're not going to be that good. I mean, the consensus was still correct, or how we imagined it to be going in the season.
And
so
honestly, I didn't vote because I don't pay enough attention. For me, in my opinion, for me to cast a knowledgeable vote, I'd really have to study those other teams.
Sure.
And I'm so busy studying Virginia Tech that I don't know anything about Cal and Stanford, and I don't know. It's one of
Good
those
running
things.
back at Cal.
Yeah,
Good
good running back.
offense.
Sure.
Jaden
Yeah, so I don't vote on things like that. I would have probably picked them fifth or sixth.
Okay.
I had them 5th. I put them ahead of Miami just because Miami. Come on, every year we do the same thing, and they get ranked high, and then they don't follow through on the promise. So and Virginia Tech could be the same thing. That's why I put them 5th and 6th. Back to back, but when you're doing the rankings, it used to be a little easier when they had the divisional setup, and you're like, okay,
Yes,
well,
yes.
I put Virginia 7th in the Coastal and then go from there. It
Yeah,
was
right.
kind of process of elimination. That's honestly how it was picked, except when like Duke was really bad in some of those seasons, and then there was a debate. But there were some spots in the polls where you just knew where you were going to put teams, and now with 17 in one division, it gets a lot tougher.
Yeah.
And honestly,
Now
this
you know how I feel for basketball.
this year I started with Stanford 17th. I knew I was going to put them 17th. I knew I was going to put Virginia 16th. Those are the two that I kind of knew. And then it was a debate about the top. But filling in, you go from 4 to 12. A lot of those teams are very similar. And like SMU and North Carolina and Cal could be in the same kind of conversation as Georgia Tech and Miami and Virginia Tech. I don't think there's too much difference between a lot of these teams.
Especially when the schedules are different. Like how can you really pick who's going to win or finish fifth when everybody's schedule is
and you
different?
play like a third of your league.
Right.
I don't understand how you can crown a conference. That's my tangent. You're going to have a situation at the end of the season where the tiebreakers are going to be so frustrating where who gets to play in a 2-game ACC championship. Because you're going to have teams with the same record at the top. You might have one team above everybody else.
This is why I think the future of the conference, instead of going to 9 conference games, is that they should have a semifinals and a finals for the conference championship, with like a bonus week for all those other teams that don't make those rounds in that 9th game.
I agree, but then the argument there is how do you play more football? The strain on the bodies.
No, I think you take away a non-conference.
Non-conference.
Okay, okay.
Absolutely.
You
Okay,
add
I'm
that
sorry,
as
I
a
missed that
round, and
part.
then for the teams that are not in that semifinal round, there's just a bonus week, and you match them up.
I would play.
That'd be fantastic.
I would play a 10-game conference schedule because you talk about unbalanced conference scheduling. 9 would be unbalanced. Some years you'd have 5 home games. Some years you just have 4. Right?
They can't even agree to go to 9 games. They're not
I
gonna go to
agree.
10 games.
I agree. They can't agree on anything. I know this. You hear some people talk sometimes when you're let's say you're changing your business model, and you should think about, well, if I was building my business from the ground up, how would I build it? This is not how you'd build college football from the ground up, is it? I mean, you wouldn't say, oh, let's have a 17-team conference where you play less than half your opponents every year, or maybe right at half your opponents every year. It doesn't make any sense at all, but that's where we are.
Give it a couple of years, you might see them building something from the ground up.
You're not wrong.
I think the top 6 is so fluid. I mean, the top 6 in the ACC, you could, if you want to sit here and say, I think the best team, no doubt, is Florida State. That's fine. 2 through 6, Miami, Virginia Tech, NC State, Clemson. I could see any of those playing in the title game.
Yeah, I think top 6, anybody could win it.
Yeah.
And maybe even, we'll see how SMU adjusts to coming in. I think they're an interesting one. Georgia Tech fascinates me because the schedule is so tough, but I think they're a pretty good football team. I don't necessarily know if they can handle that gauntlet of a schedule.
They're well coached.
They have like
to the top, but,
5th hardest schedule in the country.
Right. But I think there's just, like I've said in the past, there's not clear-cut number 1 national championship contender like Clemson was for a long time, or Florida State was last year before they got hosed at the end of the year with the 4-team playoff. But it's a little bit come back to the pack, where I think that top end depends on schedule, depends on who emerges. I think a couple different teams could win this thing this year.
Nick voted. Nick said he had Virginia Tech 4th. I had Tech 6th. So 4th for Nick, 5th for Andy. I had Tech 6th. I agree. I think it's all comes down to a combination of injuries and who you get at what time. And I think any of those top 6 teams can really have a chance to win the league. I think there are a lot of teams in that like 7 to 11 range that are really intriguing, like a Syracuse, a Georgia Tech, a Cal, North Carolina, like teams that have talent in certain areas, but might need a little bit more luck than others. It's going to be interesting though. Like first year with a 17-team conference, and we might the tiebreakers. It's going to be really weird. Gio, this is a tangent. Sure. I don't know if you have gotten to the end of a season in a college football dynasty yet.
I may or may not be on like year 6.
Oh,
How could you not be on year 6?
I hope you're simming. I was trying to figure out what the tiebreakers were because I was tied with a friend in an online dynasty. And it's like, and then I realized, like, with all of these giant conferences now, it's not like basketball where for seeding, everybody's played everybody. Like, you're going to have a lot of situations, like you said earlier, where it's going to come down to, like, overall record of overall conference record of all of the 8 opponents you played. Which is just weird because everybody's playing different teams. So it's going to be really interesting to see kind of just this first year, maybe only year with 17 teams, kind of just how it plays out. And Virginia Tech is going to be right in that conversation the whole time.
For what it's worth, we kind of got your guys' breakdown. I did not vote, but I will say I would have gone Florida State, Clemson. I'm going to differ from you guys for the sake of let's have this argument throughout the football season. That's what makes sports podcast, sports talk radio fun, is when people don't agree.
You would.
So I put
Syracuse third.
Yes.
They did get hosed at 12, in my opinion. But I got Miami third. Heisman contending quarterback.
Drinking the Kool-Aid.
I am. I'm sorry. And I understand.
If they have a bad year, we're going to buy you a Kool-Aid Man shirt. And you can wear it on the podcast at the end of the year.
I always say Miami's going to stink, and Mario Cristobal is fantastic at blowing games as well, whether he's at Oregon,
so you're picking him
at
third.
Miami, but I'm picking him third.
That's why you're picking him third.
Because of Kyron Drone's cousin, Cam Ward. And then NC State fourth, Virginia Tech fifth. I put Louisville sixth. I think it comes down to, in college football, having an elite quarterback makes a difference. And I think that's where Louisville, they lost a lot of talent. Now they reloaded. They brought in like 27 transfers, something crazy. Yep. So I'm sure they reloaded. They kind of struck gold in the portal last year, though, where every guy they brought in hit, right? And it's tough to replicate that. And I think it comes down to, you look at the quarterback play across, DJU at Florida State. I am not high on Cade Klubnik at Clemson, but it's Clemson. Cam Ward at Miami. Grayson McCall, I don't know if he'll be terrific at NC State because anybody can play for Jamie Chadwell and win football games. Kyron Drones, Virginia Tech. Louisville doesn't really have that. They brought in the kid from Texas Tech, but they don't have that it factor quarterback. He's also never played more than 2/3 of a season. Right. He gets hurt. So
I think they're so well coached and they're good in the trenches that if their quarterback has a really good year, then they could legitimately win the league. But you're right.
Yeah, if there's a coach that's going to get just like a ho-hum quarterback to be pretty good, I think Jeff Brom would be the one you choose in the ACC.
Jake Plummer last year.
Yeah, I mean, he was serviceable.
He didn't have to do much.
But
they lost
you had
Thrash.
two really good running
They
backs.
lost Garendo. They lost, obviously.
Did he throw the ball like 10 times against Tech?
Yeah, for 10 completions, I think, too. I don't think the ball hit the ground.
Crazy. Their defense is legit. Ashton Gelati's a freak. Probably him and APR, the best defensive lineman in the league, I would say.
You could say that. I mean, there's 17 teams, right? I mean, there's just it's so hard to make a first team all ACC list these days. Where APR will have to get better is consistency. So he had 9.5 sacks last year. 4 of those came in one game.
Yeah.
2 of those came in one other game. So he had 6 of his 9.5 sacks in 2 games. So only 3.5 sacks in the other 10 games, right? You'd like to see that spread out a little bit more.
We're going to bring up next podcast. We're going to bring it up today. We're going to save it. Virginia Tech did have 2 representatives on the preseason All-ACC team last week. This includes Dorian Strong and Aeneas Peebles. We're going to bring up next pod who may have been left off. We're going to talk about Kyron Drones being 4th on the Player of the Year. Cam Ward is the preseason Player of the Year. I believe above him was Omarion Hampton from North Carolina, and then Jaden Ott from Cal, and then it was Kyron Drones 4th. So we're going to talk about all that and so much more next time. We're going to talk about the offense. Pod after that, we'll talk about the defense. Nick Brown, killing it as our new full-time video production man because he's got it all mapped out for us throughout the entirety of the football preseason. Guys, before we let everyone go, what's coming up editorial-wise on TSL this week?
I'm writing my preseason offensive line thoughts today. Tomorrow I'll write my article about young, unproven players that are mentioned by the upperclassmen.
Sweet.
And have a Friday Q&A. And I think after this week I'll be doing like 3 positional previews every week up until game week.
Yeah, I've got some receivers related and something on the defensive line coming, and we'll have a practice report Friday when they get back on the field that we can watch.
Special teams.
Oh boy.
Special players. I'm writing something on special teams. There are a couple Soccer season's around the corner for anybody who
Yes.
is interested in that. Yeah. So I'm trying to set up interviews with them right now, and I'm trying to get a hold of Megan Duffy as well. So I'm going to have, obviously, football season comes around the corner and a lot of stuff picks up. I'm going to try to kind of zag when everyone else is zigging, and go get some soccer interviews before the season starts up. Mike Brizendine, Chugger Dare, and then see if I can get a hold of Megan Duffy. And basketball season, man, it's not going to come for a while, but then when it comes like smack in the middle of October, right in the middle of football season. So, and I still hadn't had a chance to catch up with her from this after June. So, yeah, a lot coming up. We had a ton of stuff from Media Day, and we'll get to observe another practice on Friday. So we'll have another report from that, obviously. Yeah, go to techsideline.com. There's a lot of really good stuff to read.
And students, you get your subscription for free, so definitely be sure to check that out. Thanks, fellas. As always, thanks to our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company. For Chris Coleman, Andy Bitter, David Cunningham, Nick Brown, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long. We'll see you next week. We're out.